I'm at Academy Duello in Vancouver, part of the worldwide historical swordsmanship community on whose knowledge and wisdom we're going to have to rely in order to make Clang a success. This seems like a great place to explore the most frequently asked question that we've received during the first half of our Kickstarter campaign, which is force feedback or the lack thereof from the hardware controller. Hey, Devin.
Hey, you.
How's it going?
Good to see you.
Good to see you. The problem people are concerned about is this. We have two players of the game, Nick and James, who may be thousands of miles apart, sitting on their respective sofas. With their controllers, they are controlling the movements of two characters in the game world, here represented by Devin, the director of the Academy Duello, and Greg, who's a sword fighter here at the Academy. In the game scenario that we're going to explore now, Nick attacks using a move called the Mandrito Fendente, and James is going to defend out of Iron Gate. So what's happened here is that the swords in the game world have bound against each other, but the controllers are still free to move, and so the swords in the game world no longer are answering to the movements of the controllers. This is an example of overcommitment, not in the sense of how serious you are about your relationships, but in the sense of how you move when you're carrying out a martial movement. And on that subject, we've got some interesting thoughts here from our friend Guy Windsor, who sent us some video from the sword school in Helsinki, Finland.
Right, chaps, Neil has asked me to cover how to deal with commitment. In other words, how committed should the blow be and what should you do against an opponent who overcommits. Okay, this is what it should look like, and this is what it usually does look like. Okay, now, first thing is to look at how to do it properly. From whatever guard you're in, as the sword goes forward, it should only go forward, and it should describe exactly the cutting path that Fury determines. When you're striking, you either strike all the way through, or you strike into the center. Okay? In either case, you should be immediately able to strike again. So if you just strike into the center and things go wrong, if you're stuck here, it's not going to work. You must be able to, for example, keep going. Yes? If you strike all the way through, again, being locked in this position isn't going to help. You must be able to smoothly move through it. And virtues a swordsman must possess. Down here we have strength, here we have speed, here we have boldness, and here we have foresight or prudence. Now, the thing is, if you strike with excessive strength, too much of this, it becomes slow. It might be very bold, but it lacks judgment. Okay? If you strike with sufficient strength and lots of speed and boldness and maintain your judgment and therefore do not overcommit, then you are adequately expressing all four virtues simultaneously. The problem with the overcommitted blow is it allows your opponent to strike before, during, or after it. Watch. Before, during, and after. Clear? The problem with the overcommitted strike is your opponent can hit you before, during, or after. If you strike with the appropriate degree of commitment, you can always have it. So, for example, if Yang enters with that same thrust as before I strike, okay, I can simply back. Yes? If I strike and counter-attack, I can simply back. Yes? And if I strike through and he strikes afterwards, I can simply pack. Is clear? What we said about not overcommitting to the strike holds equally true for not overcommitting to the pack. Watch. When it comes to strike, there's my pack. Give me a bit of sing. Okay? It's it's enough, it does the job. If I overcommit to it, yes, his life gets very, very easy, very, very quickly.
So, Devin, based on what we've been hearing here on the subject, the general subject of overcommitment, why it's bad, why it's to be avoided, what are some of your thoughts on how it applies to the particular situation that we were acting out a minute ago?
Well, I think a couple things. One is often we might think in an uneducated way that all of my swings to my opponent, my goal is going to be to just cleave into Greg as powerfully as possible. One of the things that's different about that is I'm actually really striking with an attack. When Greg doesn't parry this, I'm striking out into him with a forward blow. This gives me a lot more options to respond to what he might do, and also it gives me the largest extension to my attack. So that changes the nature of the type of blow we might be imagining if you're coming from a skilled perspective. The other thing, if Greg is going to make a parry here, one situation where I might go through is as I make the attack and Greg is moving to parry, I might deviate my blow in order to bind his sword down, so to strike it and strike through it. Now Greg is adapted as well, so this is one of the things that the controller of the game characters is going to have to learn, is that this is actually the maneuver he's going to need to make in order to respond. So, and that looks a lot better for the counterattack to me. So much better for him to learn that response and sync up with his character because it's the right move to make.
Rather than wildly over-swinging and getting into a position that A, doesn't work martially, and B, messes up your relationship with the controller.
Right. So here, actually, Greg's best response to my attack and defense is actually to yield to the force that I give him. So I'm making my attack, he moves to defend. As I turn into him, he's actually beginning to yield to that action, so he can take my force and channel it back into my body. So him continuing a parry with excessive force isn't going to do him any favors, and so this is a better thing for his controller to learn how to do, and it's more martially sound.
Okay, thanks, Devin.
No problem.
Finally, there's the question of timing and lag. We shot this with an ultra-high-speed video camera. These people are doing the same Mandrito Fendente attack and the parry from Iron Gate seen earlier. The time code down in the bottom left-hand corner, which is probably too small for you to read, gives the real time in milliseconds. As you can see, the attack spans something like a third of a second, 300 and some milliseconds. During most of that time, the defender is bringing his sword up to block the attacker's blade. You can see that if the defender had started to raise his sword just 20 or 50 milliseconds later, he'd be too late and he'd lose the fight. That brings us well within Twitch game timing constraints. In other words, if your machine or your Wi-Fi network happens to be laggy, or your roommate starts downloading perfectly legally obtained content while you're in the middle of a sword fight, you won't be able to play this game very well at real-world speeds. So we're going to have to slow down time anyway. Not enough to make the game feel slow, but just enough to make it playable. How does this relate to what we were discussing a minute ago? Well, if the action is happening on a slightly slowed down timescale, it's going to be easier for you, the player, to anticipate a sword-to-sword collision and flow around it into the next move and the next, even if you're not getting fully realistic force feedback from the controller.